Jessica, and I want to welcome you back to another episode of Workshopped It. Today we're going to go over Wolf Awakened by Avery Song, and this book is so wild. Some of you might remember in the February Black Author Readathon, I mentioned the Avery Song book, and I mentioned that I wanted to read it, but that it was just too long and I couldn't handle that commitment at this time. Well, the time has come to see what's going on in this new and gritty urban fantasy werewolf world. Like all versions of Workshops, this version is full of spoilers. If you haven't read Wolf Awakened and you don't want to be spoiled, please go ahead and stop the video here. Also, if you're looking at this video as sort of like a recommendation, suggestion, or summary, just know that this book has all of the trigger warnings. In particular, this book features a lot of characters who call themselves crazy or insane and portray some variety of mental instability or in need of mental care or mental health. And it doesn't always do a very sensitive and delicate job in portraying these people or portraying this situation or scenes. I would go so far as to say that this book is not a good picture of mental health. I'm not sorry I read this book, but it is about 800 pages long, and as you might imagine, within 800 pages, there's just way too much to cover in a single workshop. I'm trying to limit myself to the things that were most interesting, but suffice to say that I had many other counterpoints. And if you've read Wolf Awakened by Avery Song and you have something you want me to cover, or if I briefly touch on something and you want me to go into more detail on it, just go ahead and let me know in the comments down below, and I'd be more than happy to make a follow-up video. By now you guys know I do not like prologues. I just think they're the worst. But this is especially true in Wolf Awakened. We jump into a middle of a deadly fight where it looks like our main character Willow is about to die, and as she's on her last breaths, a white wolf with pink eyes, which I interpreted as a colorful description for an albino werewolf. Spoilers, I'm wrong. But anyways, this albino werewolf comes to her and demands that she transform, and she does transform into a wolf. For me, I was like, hey, wasn't the whole point of this story that I wasn't sure she could transform into a werewolf? If you solve that in the prologue, what are we gonna do with the rest of this story? And then we jump into chapter 1, which is right after Willow has completed fighting in her boxing ring situation, and all of this was incredibly confusing. It was like, wait, what happened to her almost dying? What happened to her turning into a werewolf? What happened to the albino character that she has enemies and lovers with? And did he recognize her or not? Like, there's just a lot happening that's incredibly confusing. And I actually think I was worse off reading the prologue than I would have been if I just jumped into chapter 1 and started with it. And come to find out, this prologue is literally the last action scene of this story. It's word for word part of the last chapter of the book. I'm gonna have to read this thing twice now, once before it all happens and once afterwards, like outside of context. Like, why would I want to do that? Why would any reader want to do that? Is this last chapter, this last fight scene that's like the dramatic climactic moment we've been waiting for the whole time in the book? Not only do you already know it, but it's been written in a way to be intentionally obtuse and confusing because she's used it both as the prologue and the end of her book. So there are a whole bunch of segments that are kind of like puzzle speak and like riddles and gotchas that when you get to it in the last section of the book, you're like, yeah, but I already know all these other things, or like I already know the whole history of the albino wolf. I know he's not an albino wolf. I know that he knows Willow both as Willow and as her male alternative persona, William. So this whole question, like, is this you? And I care about you and you have to live. Like, I already knew all that stuff. I knew that he knew all that. He went there specifically for her. It was just very frustrating because it was very clear to me that scene had been written to be a teaser. They'd thrown the teaser in the front as a prologue. And no, there was no thought about whether or not it would be satisfying to hit it in the back again. It also gives you reading whiplash, right? Because there's a lot of action happening in the prologue, and then we're in the middle of downtime in chapter 1. If you had thought from the prologue that this was going to be a story that just takes you and goes, never explains, never stops, just puts your foot in gas and drives, and hopefully you can take in the scenery as the car goes. If you thought that's what you were getting into, chapter 1 negates that, and it just starts being a crazy exposition dump where we learn everything about this bodyguard who's really not even that important in the story. We learn a ton about Willow and her life that's also not important to the larger story that's being told. And we learn about this criminal situation, and we learn all about Willow's childhood. And with 800 pages, you think that you could have paced this out a little bit better. And this is actually a great time to bring up world building in general within an urban fantasy story. Building a believable, cohesive world is one of the biggest challenges in urban fantasy, because you're combining elements of the real world that your reader knows and connects with, and you're pulling in these elements of something that's unreal or that's unknowable or that's far out and supernatural. You're taking the supernatural elements and trying to weave them in with something they already know, and doing it in a believable, meaningful way so that your reader has this experience like, here are things I recognize, and it makes sense that these weird things are living right next to it. And you can see what happens when this isn't set up well in a movie like Bright. There's a lot of day-to-day realism there. There's the police force, there's cities, there's references to movies and things that are within our own world today. So it has a lot of that real element working for it, and seems like it would be interesting, especially in like the trailer. But as you get further into the world, you start to see things like centaurs and other supernatural beings that couldn't live easily in a human-dominated world. And you start wondering, like, where are the accommodations for these beings? If they've been living with us the whole time, they've come together in the society, we're giving them jobs where they're working side by side, bipedal species, where are the accommodations for centaurs who are on four legs? It starts to make you question the fabric that it's built on. And then you get something like a shot like a dragon flying overhead, and it makes you wonder, like, are dragons common in this world? Are dragons sentient, or are they just dangerous creatures? And if they're dangerous creatures, how are they keeping the dragons from attacking the cities? How do they control that population? And suddenly the whole story just falls apart, because you realize that even though you relate to all these real parts of the story that are recognizable and like the world you live in, these other supernatural beings, they just don't fit. And you can't make them fit. And the more you try to work them in, the more you realize that it's just not going to happen. That there's no way this is real. And before you know it, the whole story, no matter what else is in there that's compelling or interesting, just disintegrates. And then if you're looking for world building that's done well, you could look at Zootopia. I know this is a kid's film, and I know it's not entirely urban fantasy, but it is a modern world with anthropomorphic animals all living together. And the cities that they build, each one of the little individual boroughs, they have elements of our world, how it functions and works, but it's obviously been tailored for the creatures that are living there. And the conflicts and the tension that's in that story all make sense too. There's a predator-prey scenario. We know something happened that lets them now live in harmony, but there's still this remembrance of one eating and destroying the other. Stuff that you would expect based off of your knowledge of those animals going forward. They're dealing with those issues. So it makes the whole Zootopia seem believable, because the set pieces make sense and the motivations are things that you would expect. Overall, I'd say that Wolf Awakened has passable world building. It's not a dumpster fire like Bright, but it definitely isn't a shining example like Zootopia either. A less generous reader would probably ask a lot more questions about the world building than I am. To be fair, there are a lot of holes in the world building, and I could spend a whole 40 minutes discussing them and still not cover everything. And part of that is just because there's so much to cover in creating an urban fantasy world. And another part is, for this story in particular, because it's so isolated, it's really focused on the main character, Willow/William. We really just need the setup for the pack and the crime syndicate to be good. I'm going to give the same suspension of disbelief I give in a lot of crime stories, that the police aren't onto them. I do have a couple petty world building points. The time period for this fantasy is something like 2255. It was at least 100 plus years into the future. Then I'm going to expect a jump in technology. I'm going to expect a jump in social norms. So if you're still telling me that women are as oppressed or maybe more oppressed than they are in our world now, I'm going to start to have questions about that 100 plus year jump forward. And on top of that, the songs are Billie Eilish songs. The style is the same style we have now. In fact, there's direct references to name brands that are hot right now. And in particular, the male version of our main character, William, is modeled like very intensely after Jeffree Star. And they mention Jeffree Star in the story. That just threw me off. It took me right out of the story, even when they explain that Jeffree Star's a vampire or whatever. Gee, I hope that the styles aren't all the same and stagnant. I hope like Rolls Royces transform into something different, like anything different really. I hope we've improved on pollution and all kinds of things, bringing these specific details, which I think she was doing to try to ground the story, but doing that with brands, styles, and songs that are in a very specific year dates the story very quickly, and also makes it hard to believe when you put a setting 100 plus years in the future. Even barring more petty elements, when I said I was more focused inward on the pack situation, there were a lot of pack specific questions, and I'll talk about them later when we go further in. And if I were helping to edit this, I don't know how I would choose to strengthen that, but I would ask a lot of questions of the author, and I would give them a lot of possibilities so that they could go in a new direction with this. Characters in the story fascinate me. I think they're the most interesting part of this story. The Willow-William dynamic. The main character here is Willow/William. It's a person who is a woman by night and a man by day, and they magically transform between the two forms. So that's like a lot of interesting things to me just there to unpack. Is this character trans? Is this character going to explore different expectations with gender? Are they going to have a preference for one form over the other? Are they going to act different between the forms? Like, are they two separate people in one body? Or are they the same person, more cohesive? It's just one of them has male anatomy and the other has female anatomy. How do they get comfortable swapping anatomy like that? You know, there's like a whole lot of interesting questions and things you could explore with a character like this. Some of them are explored better than others, but there are definitely moments where this is a really interesting story and where it feels like there's a little something that's trying to be said. The main love interest in this is Onyx Charm, and I really like him. I think he's a fun love interest. I've started reading the second book, and I don't like him as much in the second book, but here in the first book, he's very supportive, he's caring, he's really in tune with both Willow and William's needs, and he's pretty good at delivering on that, standing by her, maintaining loyalty, doing the best that he can to take care of her. She has a best friend, Aurelia, and the best friend is incredibly cool. I enjoy her a lot. She has a distinct, aggressive personality. She's boisterous, she's outgoing, she's powerful. She can do different things than our main character, which makes her distinct and unique. It makes them feel like they're evenly matched friends that could both help each other out of situations. I believe their cohesion. I believe that they've saved each other's lives. At the same time, these three characters, which are our main players, also feel a little muddy and unfocused. All three of them are struggling with different mental trials or senses of trauma that have happened in their life. The way that trauma is handled sometimes is troubling to me. There's like some weird elements that feel almost DID, dissociative identity disorder, but not quite. And those inaccuracies or like the way that they're portrayed make me feel vaguely uncomfortable. There's also these like vague manic and depressive states, and I'm not well versed in any of these topics. I'm just a casual armchair person looking at this, and there are things I could pick out where I was like, that's not right, or that's troubling, or that's really confusing, and it just made me feel like the author hadn't done a lot of research, and that sort of like made me feel weird about the book. Next, I want to talk about the themes. Like how the characters were kind of muddy, wishy-washy. I wasn't always sure what Avery Song was trying to get across. I really don't know what the themes of this book are. Like, I felt the book was trying to say something about gender, specifically with the Willow-William situation, but they never quite got there. I never really understood if Willow and William were two separate people. And sometimes they felt like two different people because there are things Willow likes that William doesn't, and Willow and William react to situations differently. And then there are times when they are a unified single person, or when they talk about themselves like they're a unified single person. And even within the writing, sometimes they would switch from Willow to William unexpectedly, and it would take me a long time to realize that's what had happened. Some of the differences between the Willow and the William situation read to me as like sexist stereotypes that weren't healthy for men or women. So that to me was a little bit, I also felt like the book was trying to say something about trauma, surviving intense situations. triggers and mental health in general. But again, this was such a mixed message, I didn't really know what it was saying. We could have focused entirely on Willow/William's mental recovery. And I think it would have been a really strong, interesting book. The different kinds of traumas the author gave Willow/William, the kinds of different information she'd had to take in, and the kinds of steps she'd taken to recovery, where she was in her recovery, and moving forward, even though there's stressful situations going on around her. It was all really interesting stuff, and I would have liked to explore it more. But I felt like the way it was explored was really sporadic, and it was never solely focused on long or intensely enough for me to say that that was a theme, or to even figure out what the point of that theme would have been in this story. And then there were some thematic issues that were just weird, like Willow/William's dad is supposed to be a really powerful man, both in the city of New York City and in like the underground as a crime lord, and also as a werewolf boss. All three of these things, he's supposed to be like uber powerful and crazy, and he controls his borders, and he has all this security, and he's really smart and intense and one step ahead of everyone. But in the beginning, like the third chapter of this book, there is a rogue werewolf pack that attacks Willow, and she handles it. But when she handles it, they mention that it's one of 2 new packs that's entered the territory. Why has the dad allowed them into the territory, right? Like, that's confusing. And then on top of that, there's more than just these 2 packs. There's the one that attacked Willow, which is gone. There's the Forbidden Wolf pack, which I guess is the second one. There's another pack that the best friend Aurelia goes out to handle, and she's done a bunch of research, and it's unclear whether she's torturing the pack, befriending the pack, taking the pack over, having some kind of sexual liaison with the pack, but she's doing something in the side with them that is mentioned enough that I'm curious about it, but isn't mentioned enough that I have really any good sense of it. Now, I'm very curious about the Aurelia character because she is really loyal and fun, and everything I get about her just continues to confuse me, because then I find out that one of the bonding experiences between Willow and Aurelia is that Aurelia's chosen mate or whatever had kidnapped her and taken her across the country and was doing, I don't know, nefarious things to her when Willow hunted her down and brought her back and saved her. But even though we get this story, we also find out that like there's only the one chosen mate, and it's just a thing that happens with werewolves, and they're all hoping that eventually Aurelia and this other person find their way back to each other. And that's just a lot to process. There's so much there to process. It's weird and confusing. I don't even really want to touch it. But at the same time, like, I want to mention it because there's so many elements to this story that are like that. And this is just one little side element that didn't have to be included in the main story at all, that doesn't tie back into the main story, that I don't even think Willow/William is aware of, but somehow just consumes so much of the reader's attention and brain. It like takes space in there. And then going back to the packs, right? There's only supposed to be 2 packs. I already told you there's 3. Then on top of that, there's a Dubai pack that comes in, there's a Russian pack that comes in, and then there's like these royal bloodline packs that are like super secret and extra powerful that come in the back third. Whoa, whoa, whoa. This is so many different packs, all converging on New York. Either crazy powerful dad can control his borders and territory, or he can't. But you can't have these 2 things being true at the same time. It's weird. If there's pack royalty that everyone else has to bow down to, why are they super secret? Why are they not the ones running everything? How come it's like a surprise to people that they're part of this royal lineage? Like, it's wild. It's just this crazy ride. And every time you think you're coming to a resolution, there's another drop. As you might imagine from this workshop that's so far, I would have a very hard time giving you guys a final pitch. I know the plot point A to point B, but how I would tell that story really depends on what kind of themes and characterization we want to give these characters. And Workshopped It isn't about me giving these characters themes and plot points. It is about me refining what the author did. I can't refine any of these themes. There's too many. We need to pick like 2 or 3 of them to focus on. And I just don't know which ones to focus on. So if this was like a professional edit, this is the point in time I would get in contact with the original author and say like, hey, I see all these things happening. Which one of these things did you want to focus on? And I will give you direction that way. So Generalized Changes. The book is really repetitive. I would cut this book in half. A lot of the dialogue is really stilted. Even though you can see these characters have genuine emotion emotions, they have arcs, they have feelings for each other. When they talk to each other, they often talk in ways that no two people communicate. And the most believable little snippets of conversation happen as one-liners. I would spend more time putting them in situations together and working together and less time talking. And when they do talk, I would not make them talk in full paragraphs. It's just too long for any one person to monologue. It's not how it works in real life. This story is told in alternating first person, and I actually think with this story specifically, it's a terrible idea because the emotions that they're telling us they feel don't match the actions that are happening on screen. And sometimes I would get further into the story and I'd be like, oh, well that makes sense now that I know these other things. Or oh, that's what the author is trying to drive at with that conflicting emotion versus action. It would be better if we just had the actions and I as the reader am going along and I'm assuming this one thing, and then we get to the midway point and I just see that everything I thought before was being viewed a whole different way by that character because this new information lets me know that. The bottom just dropped out, or I have to go back and reread that because now I'm going to interpret these actions in a different way. A third person would allow for that much better than first. That way you would get rid of these I thought, I feel. I don't want any of that. It really just muddied the waters and it made everything go on longer than it had to. This work tries really hard to make you love the main character. And one of the ways they do that is every person who comes in contact with Willow/William ends up admiring her or him, being in awe of them, and just pretty much talking about how amazing they are and strong and resilient they are. I'm not saying the character isn't amazing or strong and resilient, but I am saying I get really tired of other characters telling me that. Just let me see this thing or that thing and come to my own conclusions. And if I don't come to the conclusions you want, then you just have to let it go. Release the reins. I felt like I was this belligerent donkey, and Avery's song was this angry farmer just trying to yank me to what she wanted me to think or feel without any consideration for what I wanted to think or feel or the way I wanted to go with things. If you're an author, you want to lead a reader down a certain direction, you'd be better off giving them a carrot instead of continually jerking on them to go a certain way. And a little bit, you have to give it up. You write your story and you have to just trust your reader to go the way they want to go and to take at least some of your intended meaning with them. But even if they take none of it, that's out of your hands, and trying to continually force it is really annoying for a reader. The whole werewolf royalty subplot that comes in the third act, I just removed that. I don't know what it's adding. Number one, the secret royalty thing is a trope within these werewolf stories. There's always some kind of big mythical legend, secret reveal. It's just too big and preposterous. So don't do it. But also don't fall into a trap where the only reason we care about this person is because they're super special and they're royalty. Let's just care about the character and their story for what it is instead of trying to make it something it's not. And I'm going to give you an opening taste of what my chapter 1 would look like. So we would open with Willow in the boxing ring with an opponent. She's only half paying attention to them. She is actually more focused on the crowd, and they're cheering on her opponent. They're taking bets against her. They're really looking to see a woman be put in her place. She's paying attention to her bodyguard. He's casually eliminating threats. And once she's observed the bodyguard, observed him taking down some people, the opponent's going to come in and he's going to take a punch at her. And then we're going to have a fight sequence. She can handle herself in the ring. She's going to take him down easily. The crowd is going to be quiet, but she's going to turn to look to the boxing club owner, and he's going to be smiling and giving her the thumbs up. People only give Willow/William help or things that they need if they can provide value to them. So she's going to get out of the ring, the bodyguard's going to come by, she's going to high five him for that subtle destruction of threats. He's going to give her the rundown of what other threats are around, and he's going to let her know that he's going off duty and to watch her back because these other people don't know what they're doing. That's going to show that the bodyguard actually cares about Willow and that there are a lot of people around Willow that don't care about her too. We're going to do the whole shower sequence scene. It was a little bit long, but I think it established a lot of important things about Willow in a showing versus telling way already in the book. She's going to come out of the shower. Onyx Charm is going to be there. We're going to have basically the same conversation between them and the same kind of body gestures, but we're going to get rid of all of the running lovers, enemies dialogue. It was super confusing. It seemed like they had a really sweet relationship relationship. And they do, at this point in time, have a very sweet relationship. So I don't know why Willow is stuck in her head about how they were once enemies, or they're secret rivals, or whatever her deal is. You know, if we're going to talk about that at all, we should talk about it at the midway point in the book when it's relevant, but we shouldn't bring it up right in the front when I'm just trying to get a beat on these characters. So then they're going to have that back and forth conversation, and Onyx is going to get a text on his phone. He's going to look at it. He's going to realize that he has some business to take care of, so he's going to be like, I gotta go, and I'll meet you back at your house. That's going to be like close of chapter 1 and 2. Hopefully my rewrite gives more showing and less telling. It gives a little bit of action where there was just a lot of exposition before, and it starts to establish some important characters and some important features of Willow's life. And then from here, the sky is the limit. There were so many different themes and interesting ideas that were introduced in this story. Hopefully, if I were editing this for someone, they'd get back to me with what their main theme or goal was, and I would continue to workshop it from there. I want to thank you for coming with me on this episode of Workshopped It, and if you like this, I have a whole playlist of them here. And also within that playlist, I've got 2 other werewolf-specific stories that are very different than this one that I also workshopped, and would definitely recommend you check out and read. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and a comment. Let me know what you thought of Avery Song's Wolf Awakened, and if you enjoy fantasy and sci-fi stories, please consider subscribing to my channel. Post weekly content out Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Central, and right now I'm also giving little more casual rant reviews about the Nevers on Sundays. And as long as you guys keep watching and liking them, I guess I'm going to continue giving that sort of content out. Anyways, thanks for getting to the end of the video. I've really enjoyed this Workshopped It. I hope you guys do too. Thanks! Bye!